Unit 4, Properties and Changes in Matter. So yesterday we started with a physical and chemical change lab, where we identified physical properties, and then went and looked at intensive and extensive. So let's bring all the notes into what you've already applied. So all substances have properties that we can use to identify them. We're going to call these physical properties or chemical properties. Physical properties do not change the chemical nature. Specifically, they do not change the chemical formula. This is going to be very crucial, and this is why we focused on formulas before we talked about physical and chemical changes in properties. So these do not change the chemical formula, whereas a chemical property does change the chemical formula. So, water going from a solid to a liquid, the formula still stays as H2O. However, water being broken down into hydrogen gas and oxygen gas produces a new formula. H2O becomes H2 plus O2. So we have several examples of physical and chemical properties here. You should have been applying these on the lab from yesterday. Then we can take our physical properties and break them down into two categories, intensive and extensive. If something is intensive, that means it does not depend on the amount of matter present. So several examples of these would be boiling point, density, and the state of matter. These are properties that are always true. Okay? So make sure you write this here. These are always true. Whereas an extensive property does depend on the amount of matter present. For example, water boils at 100 degrees Celsius at 1 atm. Always true. It doesn't matter if we have one drop or a lake full of water. If we get it up to 100 degrees Celsius, it will boil. However, if I say that water is 10 milliliters, well, that's only true for the current amount I have. Water isn't always 10 milliliters, just at this current moment it is. So saying that something is white, well, that's going to always be true of it. But saying that it is 1 centimeter by 1 centimeter is not always true. These are the properties that only apply in this certain situation. So these apply in a certain situation. So I want you to write a mnemonic device to help you remember the difference here. So mnemonic devices are rhythmic phrases that help you remember something. Now in the table below, you're going to indicate whether something is a physical and a chemical property, extensive or intensive. If it is a chemical property, you do not need to designate as extensive or intensive. I'll do the first few with you. So for something to be magnetic, this is just a physical description of some sort of substance. So we'll put a check here. And because it is physical, we need to identify, is it extensive or intensive? So is a property always magnetic, or is it only magnetic in a certain quantity? If something is magnetic, it's always magnetic, therefore it is intensive. Malleable, you are physically describing something, so it's a physical property. And if something is malleable, it is always malleable, intensive. Temperature, we are describing its physical properties, so it is a physical property. And then, is it an extensive or intensive? Well, the current temperature of a substance is only the current temperature. It falls under this current situation and is therefore extensive. And to say something is flammable, we are talking about a property of that substance which can change chemically. To test if something is flammable, you must create a chemical change. So this is a chemical property. And all chemical properties are intensive. Next, read these 10 descriptions and identify each as a physical or a chemical property. Now for states of matter. If we have gases, liquids, and solids, there's some very important structural differences between these. You will be responsible for knowing the properties of each of these states, as listed below. Gases are separated with no regular arrangement. Liquids also have no regular arrangement. But my solids are stuck in a rigid pattern, which you can see in the picture. Gas molecules vibrate and move freely at high speeds. Liquids only slide past one another. And now solids still move. These particles must move. We still have electrons moving, but although they move, they still move in this rigid structure, so they don't move from place to place. The table below summarizes these properties and identifies the microscopic behavior responsible for each property. You need to complete this concept map using the words here, and then answer the questions on the bottom to make sure you really understand these concepts. Now go through your lab and make sure that all of your observations of physical and chemical change, your reasoning, your identifications of a physical property, and your identification of if this physical property is intensive or extensive is correct. So make sure now that we've covered all of this curriculum that you can apply it and that you have properly applied it up to now. If you have not done so already, you should have completed these hypotheses above. If a physical change is occurring, then. If a chemical change is occurring, then. Give several examples of how you would understand whether it was physical or chemical. If you have not done your conclusion so far, you should be able to do your conclusion now. Make sure you cite your scientific reasoning and what you have learned from this lab. The final thing we need to cover in this topic before we go to break is identifying physical and chemical changes. Physical changes are changes that affect the form of a chemical substance, but they do not change the chemical composition of that substance, meaning my chemical formula stays the same. You should have already read through all of this when we were going through the lab. Remember when we looked at change in color? We said that this has to be an unexpected change in color. Using this information here, you will be able to fill in the tables below. When we return from break, you will have to first turn in your December writing assignment. Second, take a quiz over ionic and covalent naming and formula writing, so make sure you review those over the break. And third, we'll have the lab from the next page, so you need to come with closed-toed shoes and be ready for lab. Have a fantastic break.